Alright, CFR 49, Chapter 2, FRA dot, Federal Railroad Administration dot, Part 239, Passenger Train Emergency Preparedness. Subpart A, 239.1, Purpose and Scope, 239.3, Application 239.5, Reserve 239.7, Definition 239, Responsibility for Compliance, 239.11, Penalties, 239.13, Waivers, 239.15, Information Collection. Subpart B, Specific Requirements, 239.101, Emergency Preparedness Plan, 239.103, Passenger Train Emergency Simulations, 239.105, Debriefing and Critique, 239.107, Reserve. Subpart D, C, Review, Approval, Retention, Emergency Preparedness Plan, 239.201, Emergency Preparedness Plan, Filing and Approval, 239.203, Retention Emergency Preparedness Plan. Subpart D, Operational Test Inspection Records, Recording Availability Records, 239.301, Operational Test and Inspection, 239.303, Electronic Record Keeping. Appendix A to Part 239, Schedule and Civil Penalties Authority, Title 49 U.S. Standard Code 2102 to 2103, 2105 to 2114, 2133, 21301, 21304, 21311, Title 28 U.S. Standard Code 2461, Note, Title 49 CFR 189 C, G, and M. Sources 63, Title 63 Federal Register 24676, May 4th, 1988, unless otherwise noted. Subpart A, General, 239.1, Purpose of the Scope. The purpose of this part is to reduce the magnitude and severity of the casualty of the railroad operations, ensuring the railroad involved with the passenger train operations can efficiently manage passenger train emergency. This part prescribes the minimum federal safety standard for the preparation, adoption, and implementation of emergency preparedness plan. Railroad connected with the operation of the passenger train requires each of the railroad to instruct the employee of the provision of the plan. This part does not restrict the railroads adopting enforcement additional more stringent requirements not inconsistent with its part. Application of the acceptance provided in paragraph 3 of the section that supply with all railroads. Railroads to operate within intercity with a commuter passenger train service with a standard gauge track that is part of the general railroad system of the transportation. The railroads that provide for the commuter or other short haul passenger trains service the metropolitan suburban areas as described in Title 49 U.S. Standard Code 20102. 1. Included but public authorities operating passenger trains service the passenger train for each railroads hosting the operation of passenger train service described in paragraph A1 and A2 of this section. The part does not apply with the rapid transit operation in an urban area that are not connected with the general railroad system and the transportation operation for the private cars, including business offices and the circuit of trains. 3. Tourist scene, historic and excursion operation whether on and off the general railroad system. 239.5 of the Reserve. 239.7 definitions. As used in this part, adjacent rail modes of the transportation means other railroads, trolleys, light rails, heavy transit, other vehicles operating with the rails, and electromagnetic guideways which are expressly identified with the Railroad Emergency Preparedness Plan. Administrative means the administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration of the magistrate delegated. The control center means the center located on a railroad with the responsible for directing safe movement of the train. Crew member means a person other than a passenger who is assigned to perform either onboard functions connected with the movement of the train employee of the railroad and contacted with the railroad who is assigned to perform subject to the federal hours and service employment during the tour of duty. On-board function for the sleeping enclosure of the car assigned with the inner-city services with other than food and beverage security. Division headquarters means for the location designated with the railroad where the high-level operating manager, superintendent, division manager, or equivalent with the jurisdiction over the portion of the railroad has an office. Emergency or emergency situation means an unexpected even event related to the operation of the passenger train service involving a significant threat to the safety and health of one or more persons requiring immediate action, including derailment, fatality of the grade crossing passenger employee with fatality, serious injury, illness or injury, one of the more passenger crew members during the admission of the hotel, and evacuation of the passenger train, a security situation, any bomb threat. Emergency preparedness means that one or more documents focusing on the prepared and respond to dealing with the passenger train service emergency responder online, emergency responder outline. Outside emergency responder means the member of the police and fire department other than an organization involved in public safety charged with providing with the coordinated emergency service to respond to the passenger train emergency. Emergency response location, response communication member means a certain location for the group of the individuals designated with the railroad responsibly established and coordinated with the maintained communication outside of the emergency responder representing with the adjacent rail mode of the transportation appropriate railroad officials during the passenger train of the emergency response communication center may be the part of the control emergency window, which means the segment of the side-facing glazing location, which has been designed to permit the rapid each of the removal of the emergency situation. FRA means the Federal Railroad Administration. Joint operation means the railroad operation can take more than one of the railroad the same track. The except for the nature necessary for the purpose of the interchange regarding whether the such organization result of the contractual arrangement between the railroads under order of the governmental agency, the court of the law, any other legal binding direction, passenger transfer for the means for the transportation of the purpose other than the employee's contract of the person riding the equipment to observe the monitored railroad operations by the railroad, intercity passenger service for the commuter, other than short haul passenger service in the metropolitan suburban area of the person. Indicates all categories of entities covered in the under Title 1 U.S. Standard Code 1, included but not limited to the railroad passenger supervisors, officials of the other employment agencies of the railroad, any of the owners, manufacturers, leases, or lessors of the railroad equipment, the tractor facility, any passenger, any trespasser, or any of the non-trespasser, independent with the contractor providing goods services for the railroad and volunteer providing the goods and services of the railroad, and employed with such owner, manufacturer, leaser, or lesser, independent contractor. Private car means of the railroad passenger, even the transport and non-revenue passenger occasion live with the contractual basis, include the business offices of the cars and circuit trains. Qualified means the status attained by the employee who successfully completed with the required training that has demonstrated the proficiency in his and authorized employer to perform the duties of the particular position function, including involved in emergency preparedness. Railroad means any form of the non-highway ground transportation runs and rail with electronic mail, magnetic guide ways, including commuter other than short haul rail with the passenger service in the metropolitan suburb in the area, and the commuter railroad service that was operated with the Consolidated Railway Corporation from the January 1st, 1979. High-speed ground transportation with the connection with the metropolitan area without regard to whether the system of the new technology associated with the traditional railroads, but it does not include the rapid transit operation with the urban area that are not connected with the general railroad system of the transportation. And 2, the person provided with the railroad transportation who directly have the contacting with the operation of the railroad to another person or railroad officer means any supervisory employee of the railroad system headquarters the means for the location designated with the railroad as the general office of the railroad system. 239.9 responsibility of the compliance. Although the requirements for this part are stated in terms of the duty of the railroad when any person included with the contract of railroad performs any function required for this part, the person who whether or not a railroad shall perform a function in accordance with this part. Penalties. Any person who violates any of the requirements for this part of the cause of the violation, any of the such requirements subject with a civil penalty of $650, not more than $25,000 violation, penalties are set for the against of individual only willful violation where grossly negligent violation or parent of the repeat of the violation created with the imminent hazard of the death and injury to the person from the cause of the death and injury to a penalty not exceeding $105,000 per violation, as such each of the day violation continues. Shall constitute a separate offense any person with a knowingly, willfully, falsely, a record of reporting required with the part of the subject of the criminal penalties under Title 49 U.S. Standard Code 21311, formerly codified in Title 45 U.S. Standard Code 43AE and Appendix A with the schedule of civil penalties. Amounts listed used in connection with this part. Statute 239.13 waiver that any person subject to the requirement of this part petition for the administrator of the waiver of the compliance such requirement. The filing of the petition does not affect persons responsible for the compliance with the requirements of the petition as being considered a petition of the for a waiver that must be filled with the manner containing the information required in Part 211 of this chapter. And the administrator filing of the waiver of the compliance in the public interest for the consistent with the railroad safety and the administrator may grant the waiver subject to any condition the administrator deems necessary. Statute 239.15, information collection. Information collection requirements the parts have been reviewed. The Office of Management Budget pursuant to the Paperwork Reduction Act of 1995 it has been assigned with the Office of Management Budget Control number 2130545. The information collection requirements are found in the following section: 239.103, 101, 103, 105, 107, 201, 203, 301, and 303. That was under 239. Subpart B, specific requirements. Statute 239.101, emergency preparedness. Each railroad to which for the part apply for the job to comply with the written emergency preparedness plan approved by the FAA under the procedures of Statute 239.201. The plan shall include the following elements procedure for the implementation of each of the plan element. The communication, initial on-board notification on-board crew of the members to accurately assess passenger train's emergency situation and notify the control center as practicable by the quickest available means as appropriate with the on-board crew member to shift the inform the passenger about the nature of the emergency, indicate the correct countermeasurements are in the progress. Notification for the control center for the emergency response communication center. The control center for the emergency response communication center for this applicable under this plan shall promptly notify outside emergency responder for the accident adjacent rail modes of the transportation appropriate to the railroad official with the passenger train emergency that has occurred with each railroad shall designate employee responsible for maintaining current emergency telephone numbers for the making the such notifications. Employee training with the qualification on board personnel of the railroad emergency preparedness plan shall address for the individual employee with the responsibility to perform the initial training with the periodic training with at least one every 2 years of the calendar years. Therefore, after the applicable plan with the provisions as a minimum of the initial periodic training shall include A, the rail requirement familiarization, situation awareness, passenger evacuation, coordinating with the functions, and E, hands-on instruction concerning the location function of the operation on board emergency equipment. 2, The control and center of the Emergency Response Communication Center personnel. The Railroad Emergency Preparedness Shell will require the initial training of the responsible control center personnel of the Emergency Response Communication Center for the personnel employed with the railroad, with the contractor, the subcontractor with the railroad, to employed with the contractor, subcontractor with the railroad, as well with the periodic training at least once every the 2 calendar year thereafter on approach course of action with each of the potential emergency situation under the plan. The minimum initial periodic training shall include the following: the territory familiarization access for the points of the emergency responders, along with the right-of-way, with the special circumstances for the e.g. tunnels, parallel operation for the other operation conditions, evaluated structure bridge for the electrified territory, and including the areas of the wrong with the railroad right-of-way with that remote that would likely present challenge for the individual responding to the passenger train emergency procedure. The retrieve, the communicate information aid of the emergency personnel, the responding to the emergency situation protocols governing internal communication between the appropriate control center with the emergency response communication center personnel whenever the imminent potential or acute actual emergency situation exists as applicable under the plan. The protocols establishing maintaining external communication between the railroad control center with the emergency response center and both the emergency responder with adjacent modes for the transportation applicable under the plan. Initial training schedule for the current personnel of the railroad emergency preparedness plan shall provide for the completion of the initial training with all on board responsible for control for the center personnel, as well as the emergency response communication center who are employed with the railroad, with the contract with the subcontractor with the railroad, and employed with the contractor or subcontractor with the railroad date with the plan with the conditional in the under statute 239-201B1 with the according to the following schedule each for the railroad that provides for the community or the show a whole passenger train service with whose operate with inclusive less than 150 route miles, less than 200 million passenger for the miles annually, not more than 1 year after January 1st, 1999, no more than 90 days after the commencing passenger operators, which if it is left for each of the railroad that provides the community with the short-haul passenger trains for the routes operations include 150-mile route of miles or at least 200 million passenger miles annually, not more than 2 years after the January 29, 1999, no more than 180 days after the commencing with the passenger operation, whichever is later for each of the railroad, it provided the intercity passenger trains regardless of the number of the route miles, passenger miles, no more than 2 years after the January 29, 1999, no more than 100 days after the commencing of the passenger operation, whichever is later. For each of the railroad, the host passenger train service, regardless of the less for the number of the route of the miles and the passenger miles of the service, not more than 1 year after the January 29, 1999, no more than 90 days after the host of the thing, whichever is later. For initial training and schedule for the new personnel of the railroad emergency preparedness plan shall provide for the completion and initial training of all the board responsible for the control center with the personnel, as well as the emergency response communication center for the personnel who are hired on by railroad contract with the or subcontract with the railroad hired by the contractor, subcontractor to the railroad after the day of the plan, which is conditionally approved within statute 239-201B1. Each of these individuals shall receive the initial training within 90 days after the individual's initial date service. Testing on board of the control center with the emergency response communication center personnel of the railroad shall have the procedure of testing and indicate individual being evaluated with the qualification under the emergency preparedness plan with employed with the railroad, under the contractor, subcontractor, the railroad, employed with the contractor, subcontractor, the railroad, with the type of the testing selected by the railroad shall be designed accurately measure for the individual knowledge of his or her responsibility under the plan, objective of the nature, administrative of the written form conducted without reference by the person being tested on the reference book for the other materials except for the degree of the person in which is being tested is his or her ability to use each of the reference book for the materials on board staffing except as provided with the area of the 825 or 826BL. Crew members on board with the passenger train shall be qualified to perform the functions for which the responsible under the provision application of emergency preparedness plan of freight train crew with the revealing of the expired passenger train crew and the amount that is not rather required to be qualified under the emergency preparedness plan provided that at least one member of the expired passenger train crew remains on board available to perform excessive services for the federal hours of service law of the event with emergency. The joint operation either railroad hosted passenger train services shall address the specific responsibility consistent with this part. 2. In order to achieve the optimum level of emergency preparedness, each of the railroad hosting the passenger train services communicate with the railroad and the provide with the operator with the service that coordinate the applicable proportion of the emergency preparedness to all the railroads involved with the hosting, providing, operating of the passenger train service shall be adopted only with the emergency preparedness plan with the address of the end, even the specific responsibility consistent with this part. Nothing in this paragraph shall restrict the ability of the railroad to provide the appropriate assignment with the responsibility of compliance with all the part among the railroad through the joint operation agreement and other binding contracts. However, the assignee shall not be relieved the responsible for the compliance with this part. Special circumstances. When applicable, the railroad emergency preparedness plan shall reflect the readiness for procedure designed to ensure the passenger safety in the emergency situation occurring with a tunnel with 1,000 feet within the more left. More than likely, the railroad emergency preparedness plan shall address the minimum availability of the emergency lighting and access for the emergency evacuation exists for the exits, bench walk, the readiness ladder for the training of the effective the radio, other communication between an onboard crew member of the control center for the operation of the assist of the other trains. Other operating with a consideration when applicable, the railroad emergency preparedness plan shall address the passenger train emergency procedure involved in the operation for the evaluated structure, including the drawbridges in electrified areas. Parallel operation with the application of the railroad emergency preparedness plan shall require reasonable prudent actions to coordinate emergency effort with the adjacent rail with the modes of the transportation run parallel to either the passenger railroad or the railroad hosting passenger corporate operations. Liaison to the emergency respond to each of the railroads to which there was applied with the established maintain a working relationship with the online emergency responders at a minimum. 1. Developing, making available the training program for all online emergency responders could reasonably be expected to respond during the emergency situation. The training program shall include an emphasis for the access for the railroad equipment, location of the railroad facilities, communication interface provided the information of the emergency responder who may not have the opportunity to participate in the emergency situation. Each effective of the railroad shall either have the training directly provided with the program and information material with the safe training institutes, firefighter with the organization policies and academies. 2. Invite with the emergency responder to participate in the emergency situation. 3. The distribution of applicable proportion for the current emergency, the preparedness of at least 1 half every 3 years whenever the railroad materially changes its plan with the manner of the reasonable and be expected for the effect of the railroad interface with the online emergency responder, whichever that is curved earlier, and documentation concerning with the railroad equipment with the physical characteristics of its line, necessary map of the power position, telephone number of the relevant railroad officers to contact onboard emergency equipment. In general, each railroad emergency preparedness plan shall state with the type of the emergency equipment to be kept on board indicating the location on each of the passenger car within the service effective May 4th, 1999, no more than 220 days after the commencing of the passenger operation, which is delayed of the equipment shall include the minimum 1 fire extinguisher per passenger car, 1 pry bar per passenger car, 1 flashlight per onboard car. 2. Effective May 4th, 1999, no more than 120 days after the commencing of the passenger operation, whichever those later, each of the railroads provided with the intercity passenger train service shall is equipped. Also, passenger train that is in service with at least 1 first aid kit with accessory with the crew members that contains a minimum of 2 small gauge gauze pads at least 4 inches by 4 inches, 2 large gauze pads at least 8 inches by 10 inches, 2 adhesive bandages, 2 triangle bandages, 1 package of gauze roller bands at least 2 inches wide, wound cleaning agents such as the sealed moistened towelettes, 1 pair of scissors, 1 pair of tweezers, 1 roll of adhesive tape, 2 pairs of latex gloves, 1 resuscitation mask. 3. Onboard emergency lighting consistent with the pair requirements of the paragraph 238 of the chamber with the auxiliary portable lighting, the handheld flashlighting, meaning it must be accessible provided the minimum of branded illumination during the first 15 minutes of the onset with the emergency situation. Continue with the intermittent illumination during the next 60 minutes after the onset with the emergency situation. Or maintenance. Each railroad emergency preparedness plan shall provide with a scheduled maintenance of the required placement of the first aid kits on board equipment on board emergency lighting. Passenger service and safety information. Generally, each of the railroad emergency preparedness plans shall provide with the passenger awareness of the emergency procedure to ensure the passengers respond properly during the emergency. Passenger awareness programs, the activity each of the railroads should consistently legally post the emergency instructions, including all the passenger cars, e.g. on the car bulkhead sign, the setback of the decal set cards, and shall utilize 1 or more of the additional methods to provide safety awareness information, including but not limited to 1 of the following: onboard announcements, laminated wallet cards, ticket envelopes, timetable, the station sign, provide video monitors, public service announcements, or seat drops. 8. Procedure regarding the passenger with a disability. The railroad emergency preparedness plan shall include the procedure to promote safety of the passenger with a disability under all the conditions identified in the emergency preparedness plan, so that during the train evacuation, the procedure shall include, but not limited to, the process of notifying of the emergency responders in the emergency situation about the presence of the general location of each of the passenger when the railroad has knowledge for the passenger in on board train with the railroad does not have the knowledge of such passenger to have the disability unless the crew member has actual knowledge of the disability, such that the passenger, his or her companion of the fellow passenger, has expressly informed the crew member of on the train with a disability where the disability is readily apparent. Nothing of this part of the required the railroad to maintain any of the maintain any list of trained passengers. 239-103 passenger train emergency situation. Generally, each railroad and passenger train of the service shall conduct with a full service emergency situation and when in order to determine the capability, execute the emergency preparedness plan under the variety of scenarios that could be responsibly expected to occur with the operation and ensure the coordination with the level emergency responders voluntarily agree to participate in the emergency simulations. B. The frequency of emergency simulation except as provided in paragraph C of this section, each railroad have to provide with the commuter and other short-haul passengers for the train service to operate with this include less than 150 route, less than 200 million passenger miles annually should conduct the minimum of one full-scale emergency situation simulation during every 2 calendar years. Each railroad that provides for the commuter over the short-haul passenger train service operation includes at least 150-mile route to add at least 200 million routes and million passengers annually, but they shall conduct a minimum of one full-scale emergency simulation during each calendar year. Each railroad that provides intercity passenger train service shall conduct a minimum of one full-scale emergency situation simulation during each of the calendar year, regardless of the number of the route with miles and passenger miles. Actual emergency situation, either at the tabletop exercise of the activation of the emergency preparedness plan during the actual emergency situation may be credited towards the minimum number of the full-scale emergency simulations required under the paragraph B of the section. However, the railroad has activated the emergency preparedness plan in response to the major emergencies may elect to postpone the scheduled full-scale simulation for the up to 188 calendar days to beyond the applicable calendar year completion of the day in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the plan during the major emergency that has appropriately modified the rescheduled simulation. B. Definition. As used in this section, the major emergency means the unexpected event of the related to the operation of the passenger train service as a result of the serious injury, death of one or more persons or property damage greater than current reporting threshold of the Part 225 chapter of the railroad on-track equipment signal and track structured roadbed, including labor, the cost of acquiring the new equipment and material. 239-105 debriefing criteria. The general acceptance provided with the paragraph B with the section each of the railroad operating with the passenger train service shall conduct the debriefing criteria after each of the passenger trains emergency situation full-scale simulation to determine the effectiveness for the emergency preparedness plan shall improve with the amendment of this plan that is appropriate in accordance with the information developed with the debriefing criteria. The council session shall be conducted within 60 days of the day of the passenger train emergency situation full-scale simulation to extent practicable on all the board personnel, control center personnel, and any other employees involved with the emergency situation full-scale simulation shall participate in session either in person, off-site via telephone conference, in writing with a statement of responding to the question, providing the prior to the session, providing to any follow-up questions. Exemption. Now, debriefing the criteria shall be required within the case of the emergency situation involving only the collision between the railroad passenger of the railroad rolling stacked pedestrian, attached passenger, motor vehicle, other trains, highway conveniency, highway, railway, grade crossing provided with the collision does not result in the passenger emergency or employee faculty, fatality, and injury to one or more of the crew members of the passenger requiring the mission of the hospital evacuation of the passenger train. For purpose of this section, highway, railway crossing means the location of the public highway, railroad, street, private roadway, including associated sidewalk pathways and cross one or more railroad track grades of the trespasser means the person who is on part of the railroad property who is used in a railroad operation when presence is prohibited and forbidden, unlawful. Purpose of the debriefing and the critique. The debriefing and the critique section shall be designed to determine at the minimum whether onboard communication equipment can function properly, however much time will elapse between the occurrence of the emergency situation, full-scale simulation, notification to emergency responder involved, whether the control center of the emergency response center, communication center with the promptly initiated with the required notification as applicable under the plan, how quickly and effectively the emergency responder responds after notification, of how efficiently the passenger exists if the car emergency exists, if they include the passenger who the disability, injury for the railroad has knowledge of any such of the passengers. Records. Each of the railroads shall maintain a record of the debriefing and the criteria for the session for the system headquartered, the applicable division headquartered for the 2 calendar years after the end of the calendar year for the way relate include the following information. Date, location, passenger train emergency full-scale simulation, date of location, debriefing, the criteria, critique session, name of all the participants of the debriefing and critique session. These records shall be available to the representative of the FRA with the state participating under the Part 212 of the chapter for inspection, copying of the normal business hours. Alright, subpart C, review and approval of the retention of emergency preparedness plan. 239, 201, emergency preparedness plan, filing and approval. The filing of the plan, amendment to filing of the plan, each passenger railroad, to which they apply to the railroad hosting the passenger train service for the applicable to jointly adopt this emergency preparedness plan with the service of the passenger train, but shall file one copy of the plan with the Associate Administrator of the Railroad, Chief of the Safety Officer, Federal Administrator, 1200 New Jersey Avenue Southeast, mail stop 25 with Washington, D.C. 20590, with not less than 60 days after the commencing of passenger operation for any passenger railroad. That's emergency railroad preparedness plan approved by the FRA as of July 29, 2014. Considered with the timely file with the plan. Emergency preparedness plan shall include the name and the title of the address and stated street address if available, the address for the telephone number of the primary person on effective the railroad to be contacted with regard to the review of the plan shall include the summary each of the railroad and analysis supporting each of the plan employment is describing each of the condition of the railroad property is likely to affect the emergency plan is response addressed in the plan. Alright, following the amendments to the plan, except as provided in paragraph A21 of the section of the subsection of the amendment to the railroad emergency preparedness plan shall be filed with the FRA passenger train not less than 60 days prior to the proposed effective date of the amendment. And filling the amendment to the railroad must include the written summary of the proposed changes to the previous approved plan as applicable to the train plan, describing how and when the new employees otherwise within the scope of the training the requirement of statute 239-101 A2 would retrain with the amendment. If the proposed amendment still is limited to adding change of the name of the street, title, street address, and email address, the telephone number of the primary person to be contacted, each of the effects of the railroad with regard to the review of the plan approval is not required, but the process of paragraph B31 of the section of the proposed amendment may be implemented with the railroad upon the FRA's Associate Administrator of the Railroad Safety Chief of the Safety Officer. All other proposed amendments must be complied with the formal approval of the process of the paragraph B31 section. Approval of the preliminary review within 90 days of the receipt of the proposed emergency preparedness plan, within 5 days of the receipt each of the passenger plan for the passenger operations plans for the initial deadline for the plan submission. FRA will conduct a preliminary review of the proposed plan to determine the elements described in statute 239-101 the sufficient address for the discuss the railroad's plan submission. FRA will then notify the primary contact for the person with effect of the railroad writing and the result of the review whether they proposed by the been conditional approved by the FRA with if not conditional with approved with the specific points with a deficiency. If the proposed emergency proposed plan is not conditional and approved by the FRA, the effect of the railroad will show amend the proposed plan to correct the deficiencies identified in the FRA with all provided with the FRA will the corrected copy no later than 30 days following the receipt of the FRA written notice that was proposed plan was not approved, conditionally approved. Final review within 18 months of the receipt of each of the proposed plan with 180 days of the receipt of the proposed plan with the passenger train with the commence for the after the initial deadline for the plan submission for the FRA will conduct the comprehensive for the review conditional improvement plan to evaluate the implementation of the elements included review including the ongoing dialogues for the railway management with labor representative of the field analysis verification. The FRA will notify the primary contact person of each affected railroad and in the writing of the result of the review whether the conditional approval of the plan has been finally approved by the FRA has been approved with the scientific specific points in which the plan is deficient. Alright, 2. An emergency preparedness of the plan over the railroad of the railroads is not finally approved by is not finally approved by the FRA. The effect of the railroads shall be amended the plan to correct all the deficiencies and provide the FRA with the corrected copy no later than 30 days following the receipt of the FRA's written notice for the plan with the finally approved the review of the amendment with except for provided in paragraph 2A22 the section of the FRA will normally review each of the proposed plan amendment of the 45 days after the review the receipt of the FRA will then notify the primary contact person each of the facts of the railroad to resolve the review whether they proposed amendment to approve of the FRA but does not approve of the specific point in which the proposed amendment is deficient. If the amendment is not approved, the railroad shall correct any of the deficiencies identified with the FRA with the corrected amendment to the implementation of the implementing the amendment. Reopen and review for following initial approval of the plan amendment, the FRA may reopen consideration of the plan amendment the cause stated. Alright, Statute 239-203, retention of the emergency preparedness plan. Each passenger railroad to which for the partly apply for all the railroad hosting the passenger train through the applicable shall each of the retain one copy of the emergency plan required in the Statute 239-201, one of the copies of the subsequent amendment of the plan with the system Division headquarters for each of those shall make the records available to the representative of the FRA state participating under this Part 212 with the chapter inspection copy during the normal business hours. Subpart D. Operational testing inspection records of the record keeping the availability of the record. Operational testing inspection requirement of the conducting operational inspection each of the railroad which for the parties for the flight periodically conduct operational test for the inspection for the onboard personnel of the response for the control center for the personalized applicable emergency response for the communication center of the and personnel of the emergency employed by the railroad under Contract or subcontract with the railroad employed with the contractor subcontractor with the railroad determine the extent of the compliance with the emergency preparedness plan program. The operational testing inspection should be conducted in accordance with the railroad program. The new railroad shall adopt such a program within 30 days of commencing railway operation. The program shall provide the operational testing inspection appropriate for the course of action for the response to the various potential emergency situation on the responsibility employed with the railroad and as an individual with the contractor subcontract with the railroad and employed with the contract with the subcontract with the railroad as related with the railroad's emergency preparedness plan. Subscribe to each type of the operational testing inspection, including the means for the procedure used to carry it out. The state of the purpose of each for the type of the operational testing inspection. For the state of according to the operative division with the where applicable the frequency in which of each of the operation testing and the inspection is to be conducted. 5. The identify the officer name of the job title division system with which who shall be responsible to ensure with the program the operational testing and instructions are properly implemented. The railroad with the operating division shall identify at least one of the officer system headquarters that is responsible overseeing the entire program and the implementation of each division. 6. Require that each of the railroad officers to conduct an operational testing and inspection training with those aspects of the railroad emergency preparedness plan that are relevant to the operational testing and inspection, but then the other officers conduct with the officer qualified for the procedure conducting the operational testing and inspection in accordance with the railroad program over the operational testing and inspection requirements of this section of the program. Operational testing and inspection required for the paragraph A1 of the section may be combined with the written program where the operational testing and inspection is required in the statute 217.9 of this chapter. Maintaining records of operational testing and inspection. Each of the railroads shall, which is part of the pledge, shall maintain a record of the date and the time of the place for the result of the operational testing and inspection performed in accordance with the paragraph A of the section. Each railroad shall also specify the name of the railroad officer administrator for the test and inspection, the name of each of the employee test and sufficient information to identify the relevant facts relied on the evacuation purposes. Retain the operational test and inspection record. Each of the record required in paragraph B of the section shall be retained with the system headquarters of the railroad, such as applicable to the division headquarters of the division where the test and inspection was conducted for 1 calendar year. After the end of the calendar year which the test and inspection relates, each of the records shall retain either in a hard copy electronically or pursuant to statute 239.303, which shall be made available to the representative of the FRA state with the participating under the Part 212 of the chapter for the inspection copy during the normal business hours. Retaining record programs of the operational testing and inspection. Each railroad shall retain 1 copy of the current operational testing and inspection program required in paragraph A of the section, 1 copy of each of the subsequent amendments. Each of the such program that required should be retained with the system headquarters as the applicable to the division headquarters. Operational testing and inspection are conducted 3 calendar years after the end of the calendar year to which after the end of the calendar year which they relate, their records will be retained shall be retained either a hard copy electronically pursuant to 239.303, so made available to the representative of the FRA state participating under the statute Part 212 of the chapter for the inspection copy in the normal business hours. Alright, 6-month review, test, and inspection and adjustment with the program operational testing and inspection no less than every 6 months for the officer responsible for overseeing the entire program, the operational test inspection under the section implementation of the program, each of the division and any of the systems designated for the pursuant of the paragraph 815 of the section for the shall conduct periodic reviews and analysis to provide with the paragraph prepare the records review to provide with the paragraph to maintain 1 copy of the record system and headquarters of the applicable to each of the division headquarters each site for the review, which shall be complete within 30 days for the close of the period during the review. The record should be each of such review shall be retained within hard copy electronically and pursuant to 239.303 for each of the period 1 year after the end of the calendar year to which for the review of the relates to made available to representing with the FRA inspection copy during the normal hours. In particular, each designated officer review of the record shall include the following: the operational testing inspection data that each of the division and if any of the system with the data determined to comply with the railroad testing officer with the program operational testing and inspection required in the paragraph A1 of the section. The minimum of this review should include the name of each of the railroad testing officer, the number of the test and inspection conducted with each of the each officer where the officer conducted the minimum number of each of the test and inspection required with the paragraph program railroad's program. Accident incident will report the results prior operational testing inspection under the select section under the permanent safety data of each division. If any of the system will identify the relevant operation rules related to the accident incident that occurred during the period based upon the result of the review of the data of each division. If any other team, the designated officer shall make the necessary adjustments for the test and inspection required for the officer of the subsequent programs. Implementation of the program operational testing inspection over the section system perspective to ensure the program is being Utilize intended author review to provide with the paragraph that has been properly completed, but the appropriate adjustments have been made with the distribution, test, and inspection required with the railroad testing office the appropriate direction of their efforts. The annual summary with the operational test and the summer and the inspection before March 1st of each of the calendar year. Each railroad with the parts of the shell prepare the retain with the system headquarters of the railroad applicable to each of the division headquarters. One copy of the summary following the respect of the previous calendar year. Activity number, the type of the results, each of the operational test and inspection stated according to the operational division applicable that was conducted in required paragraph A of the section recorded. Each of the summary shall be retained with a hard copy electronically pursuant to statute 239-303 with the 3 calendar years after each of the name of the calendar year which the record relates shall be made available to represent with the FRA state with participating with under the part 212 of the chapter for inspection copying during a normal business hour. Alright, statute 239-303, electronic record keeping. Each of the railroads to which they apply if they authorize to retain the electronic record keeping the information prescribed in 239-301, provided that all the following conditions are met. The railroad are adequately limited for the control of accessibility, such that the information retained with the database system identifies those individuals who have such access. The railroad have the terminal of the system headquarters at each of the division headquarters. Each such terminal has a desktop computer with the manager, central processing unit, keyboard, either the fifth mile machine or printed with the conductor connected to the computer, retrieving the procedural information using format for immediate review for the representative of the FRA state with the participating on the Part 212 of the railroad shall have the designated representative that is authorized to authenticate and retrieve the information for the electronic system, true and accurate, a copy of the electronic kept the records. The railroad provided with the representative of the FRA state for the participating on the Part 212 of the chapter immediately access the records for the inspection and copied during the normal business hour that provided the printouts and such requests. Alright, here, Appendix A shows the Part 229 civil schedule penalties for Subpart B, Subpart C, and Subpart D. And that completes 239 passenger train emergency preparedness.